Infantile Sexuality is the second essay in Freud's book, Three Essays on the Theory of Sexuality, published in 1905. This video is a continuation of the last, in which I talked about the first essay from this book called The Aberrations. Freud in this essay dismisses the popular idea at his time that sexual instinct develops after puberty and says that sexual instinct is not developed after puberty but is present throughout childhood. Freud says one feature of the popular view of the sexual instinct is that it is absent in childhood and only awakens in the period of life described as puberty. This, however, is not merely a simple error but one that has had grave consequences, for it is mainly to this idea that we owe our present ignorance of the fundamental conditions of sexual life. He also says there seems no doubt that germs of sexual impulses are already present in the newborn child and that these continue to develop for a time but are then overtaken by a progressive process of suppression. This, in turn, is itself interrupted by periodical advances in sexual development or may be held up by individual peculiarities. Nothing is known for certain concerning the regularity and periodicity of this oscillating course of development. Then Freud talks about thumb sucking as a sexual manifestation, saying that the most striking feature of the sexual activity is that the instinct is not directed towards other people but obtains satisfaction from the subject's own body, from the child's own body, which can be called autoerotic. Furthermore, the behavior of a child who indulges in some thumb sucking is determined by a search for some pleasure which has already been experienced and is now remembered. In the simplest case, he proceeds to find the satisfaction by sucking rhythmically at some part of the skin or mucous membrane. It is also easy to guess the occasions on which the child had his first experiences of the pleasure which he is now striving to renew. Breastfeeding was the child's first and most vital activity that must have familiarized him with this pleasure. And the child's lips behave like an erotogenic zone, and no doubt stimulation by the warm flow of milk is the cause of the pleasurable sensation. The satisfaction of the erotogenic zone is associated with the satisfaction of the need for nourishment. To begin with, sexual activity attaches itself to one of the functions serving the purpose of self-preservation and does not become independent of them until later. The need for repeating this sexual satisfaction now becomes detached from the need for taking nourishment, a separation which becomes inevitable when the teeth appear and food is no longer taken in only by sucking but is also chewed up. The child does not make use of an extraneous body for his sucking but prefers a part of his own skin because it is more convenient, because it makes him independent of the external world. It does not make him depend on something external which he is not yet able to control, and because in that way he provides himself, as it were, with the second erotogenic zone, the one of an inferior kind. The inferiority of this second region is among the reasons why at a later date he seeks the corresponding part, the lips of another person. Freud's study of thumb sucking or sensual sucking has given us the three essential characteristics of an infantile sexual manifestation. At its origin, it attaches itself to one of the vital somatic functions. It has as yet no sexual object. It is thus autoerotic and its sexual aim is dominated by an erotogenic zone. This was the oral phase. Then Freud talks of the anal phase in children 1 to 3 years of age, with the appearance of the first teeth and the strengthening of the muscular apparatus. The anal phase emerges with the anal zone being able to gain pleasure, another erotogenic zone. Children who are making use of the susceptibility to erotogenic stimulation of the anal zone betray themselves by holding back their stool till its accumulation brings about violent muscular contractions, and as it passes through the anus is able to produce powerful stimulation of the mucous membrane. In doing so, it must no doubt cause not only painful but also highly pleasurable sensations. One of the clearest signs of subsequent eccentricity or nervousness is to be seen when a baby obstinately refuses to empty his bowels when he is put on the pot. That is, when his nurse wants him to, and he holds back that function till he himself chooses to exercise it. He is naturally not concerned with dirtying his bed. He is only anxious not to miss the subsidiary pleasure attached to defecating. Educators are once more right when they describe children who keep the process back as naughty. The retention of the fecal mass, which is thus carried out intentionally by the child to begin with, in order to serve as a masturbatory stimulus upon the anal zone or to be employed in his relation to the people looking after him, is also one of the roots of the constipation which is so common among neuropaths. Furthermore, the whole significance of the anal zone is reflected in the fact that few neurotics are to be found without their special scatological practices, ceremonies, and so on, which they carefully kept secret. This shows how the history of the first prohibition which a child comes across, which is the prohibition against pleasure derived from anal activity, has a decisive effect on his whole development. This must be the first occasion on which the infant has a glimpse of an environment hostile to his instinctual impulses, on which he carries out the first repression of his possibilities for pleasure. And from that point onwards, what is anal remains the symbol of everything that is to be excluded from his life. Moving on, the distinction between sexes happens next in the phallic phase, according to Freud, during which the leading erotogenic zones become the genitals. Children, according to Freud, attempt masturbation during this time but are often suppressed in doing so by their parents. This can manifest in a castration complex in boys, when parents threaten to damage the penis if masturbation does not stop. Boys also notice their sisters and mothers and other female members of the family missing a penis or not having a penis, and develop infantile theories of mutilation and the fear of losing their own penis. He also describes how some boys devalue the genitalia of women, leading to the overvaluation of the penis and consequently homosexuality. I made a video on the first essay of this book, The Aberrations, and I made a video on that. You can check that out too, to understand how different childhood experiences, according to Freud, could lead to homosexuality, or inversion as he calls it. Now, the latency period begins following the age of 4 up till puberty. Freud says that it is during this period of total or only partial latency that are built up the mental forces which are later to impede the course of the sexual instinct. Sexuality takes a different course through parental love that involves hugs, kisses, strokes, etc. And sometimes this love can lead to spoiling because the child is then incapable in later life of temporarily doing without love or of being content with a smaller amount of love. One of the clearest indications that a child will later become a neurotic is to be seen in an insatiable demand for his parents' love or affection. Moving on to puberty, Freud says that when the child reaches puberty, a major shift occurs when a complete sense of male and female emerge within him. It is not until development has reached its completion at puberty that the sexual polarity coincides with male and female. Maleness combines subject activity and possession of the penis, and femaleness takes over object and passivity. This is the time when the child directs sexual energy towards other people. At this point, Freud theorizes that children look for their parents in their choice of partner. He says that even a person who has been fortunate enough to avoid an incestuous fixation of his libido does not entirely escape its influence. A man especially looks for someone who can represent his picture of his mother, as it has dominated his mind from his earliest childhood. In view of the importance of a child's relations to his parents in determining his later choice of a sexual object, it can easily be understood that any disturbance of those relations will produce grave effects upon his adult sexual life. Jealousy in a lover is never without an infantile root, or at least an infantile reinforcement. If there are quarrels between the parents or if the marriage is unhappy, the ground will be prepared in their children for the severest predisposition to a disturbance of sexual development or to a neurotic illness. Freud now talks of sexual theories of children. By looking at sex as bad and keeping it a mystery, Children would piece together theories that would affect how they would view their sexuality and that of the opposite sex, and they would associate sex with sadism. Not understanding the value of the female genitalia could lead to a devaluation of female sexuality, and repression could lead to conversion symptoms or hysteria even. Freud proposed that sex education would solve these problems. So that was it for Infantile Sexuality, which is the second essay in the book. In the next video, I'll be talking about the third essay called The Transformations of Puberty.